Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Zyxel webinar. Today's topic is about switching, mainly small to medium business switching. My name is Jukka Vesa. I am the sales engineer for the Nordic region. And if you have any questions, please put them into the questions or chat section of GoToWebinar, and we will cover them at the end. So without further ado, let's move onwards. So the agenda for today is to go through some switching basics, just some basic information and hardware information, what means what basically. Then the switch series that we are going through today are GS 1900, 1920 version 2 and the XGS 1930s. And then we will take a closer look of the two latter series, so the 1920 version 2 and the 1930s. Then at the end, we will discuss a bit what is Nebula Flex and what benefit it gives you all when managing switches. And the 1920s and the 1930 series are Nebula Flex series switches, so you can manage them either standalone or in Nebula, which is our cloud management platform. So let's start off with switching basics. First, with the naming convention of Zyxel Switches. When the switch name, we always have starting with something. So ES switches, we don't really have anymore. They mean that all ports are up to 100 megs. GS meaning up to 1 gig. XS meaning up to 10 gigs. And this also includes the multi-gig switches, for example, the XS3800. And when talking about multi-gig switches, the port speeds that are supported are 1 gig, 2.5, 5, and 10 gigs. And this also includes all copper and SFP ports on that particular switch, or all XS switches. XGS is something in between, so all the uplink ports are 10 gigs and all the other traditional ports are 1 gigs. Then we have an MGS switch series or a Metro Gigabit switch, mostly used as a fiber aggregation switch, but also has a lot of software features for ISPs, etc. So can work in all sorts of deployments and installations, but mostly meant for metro carrier switches. But as said, when you need a lot of SFP ports, for example, that's a good switch to start. Then when the model number is ending with P or HP, that means that it's a PoE switch. All the current models are HP, so supporting the PoE Plus or the 30 watt standard. F means that it's a fiber version of that switch. For example, the XGS 4600, we have that as on a copper version, or F as all the ports are SFPs and just a couple of copper ports for management purposes, etc. So for example, XGS 4600, 32 and 32F. Then when we go to more in detail about the switching themselves, in almost all switches we have combo ports. These actually at the back end are the same port. It just allows you to connect two types of media in it. So either an RJ45 cable or an SFP module. So this gives you the freedom of choice. Do you want to use a fiber connection or just a standard Ethernet cable to that switch? And these are usually used as uplink ports of that switch. power over Ethernet. So when we have these HP switches, it means that the switch can provide power to PDs or powered devices. And these devices, for example, IP cameras, access points, IP telephones, then they don't need a local power supply for that device. And it is especially handy when you are installing devices in ceilings or in hard to get places. So after 3 to 5 years, you won't need to go run around chasing power supplies when they break down. About PoE standards, we're starting from the standard PoE or AF standard. It means that the switchboard is able to provide 15.4 watts of power, or actually at the PD end, it means 12.95 watts. So that is the maximum amount of power consumption that the powered device can have. Then we have the AT standard or class 4, meaning that the switch is delivering 30 watts of power, and the maximum amount of power available to the powered device is 25.5 watts. And then the BT standard, 60 watts from the switch and 51 watts from the device, also known as Ultra PoE. These types of devices are fairly rare. They are usually heated cameras with motors in them or something like that. And also there aren't many devices, aren't many switches around that can actually support a BT standard. And usually when you have a BT powered device, you use a power injector just particularly for that device due to the high power consumption of it. We actually do have a new model on the security lineup of switches that we just released that supports the BT standard, but none of the switches we are talking about today supports that, so just AT. And of course, backwards compatible to AF. Then SFP ports. So the fiber connection ports usually used for uplinks to other switches. SFP means that the module speed is 1 gig, and SFP plus means that the module speed is 10 gigs. In here you need to be careful what module you put into what switch. So you can't make a 1 gigabit port on a switch 10 gigs just by putting in an SFP plus module, but these are of course backwards compatible. So for example, in the XGS switch where you have 10 gig uplink ports, you can put a standard SFP port, but then it just works with 1 gigabit speed rather than 10 gigs. So SFPs are backward compatible, but not the other way around, of course. Different types of fiber modules that we have available. These are just the most common ones we sell. We provide a multi-mode and a single mode module in 1 gig and 10 gig. And then we supply the direct attach cables, 1 meter and 3 meters. These are very handy and cost-effective way to connect your switches which are located in the same rack. So less equipment to deal with, cheaper price, and you won't get dust into your fiber connections. So it's a win-win-win situation by using DAC cables if you can. The question about what module should I buy in which installation is determined by the in-house cabling of the site you are currently installing to. Usually longer cable draws are done with a single mode, and shorter kind of in-building cabling is done with multi-mode, but there are a lot of exceptions to that rule, and many buildings have only single mode cabling in it, so you really need to be careful what module you choose, and that is always determined by the in-building existing cabling. SFP modules are easy to purchase and cabling is hard to draw. So then we go to the top level part of these three series, and what do we provide for them? So we provide an intelligent PoE function to each and every switch of this series, and that means that we only allocate the amount of power that the PD actually requires. So if we take, for example, our NAP 102 Nebula access point, our entry-level business access point. That is an AF standard access point, and by classification, it would draw 15.4 watts, but its actual power consumption, depending on the usage, is somewhere from 2 to 5 watts. So that already saves you 2/3 of the PoE budget by using a consumption mode or an intelligent PoE mode. And basically it means that you can utilize the switch's PoE budget more efficiently and plug in more devices to that same switch without running out of PoE budget. We also offer a free deployment tool, which can be used for other as deployment purposes as well, called Zyxel One Network Utility, or ZON. You can, the most easily you can find it by just Googling Zyxel ZON. It is a handy little piece of software that you can just install to your laptop and scan all the Zyxel devices and that network, even if the devices have the same IP address. So if we are preparing an installation back at our office and we have, let's say, 10 to 20 switches stacked up, we can just plug in all the switches together and plug our laptop into one and discover them all, rather than just going through switches one by one, upgrading the firmware, changing the configuration. So we can just bulk upgrade all firmware at once. We can set the management IPs, we can push configurations, we can take configuration backups, etc. We also give lifetime warranty to all these products, or limited lifetime warranty, and that means until the product is end of life plus 5 years. So a very extensive warranty on all of these business products. And they also come with the advanced replacement as standard. So our RMA sends you a replacement device, and you just pack the broken device into the same box, and all is paid for. You just ship it back in the same box. So no on-site downtime needed if the device is still up to its task, at least some. We as Zyxel, not just for switching, but for all of our products, we offer free firmware for life of the product. And this doesn't only include bug fixing and security fixes, but it includes all the new firmwares that we are developing. So if we are introducing new features that we are developing, new features to each of these switches, they will be included in the new firmware releases, and you will of course have them for free. So no cost involved, on no service contracts, no maintenance contracts needed with us. The switching series, just on the top level. On the 1900 series, we have a couple of switches, the 8 HP and 10 HP, which have an external power supply. So the switch itself is very small, but of course it needs an external power supply, so that is something you need to plan for the installation. It of course comes with the power supply. Then there's a particular model called 24E, which is meant for a desktop switch rather than a rack-mounted switch. On the 1920 series and the 1930 series, these are all new switches, and we will go into more detail later on what features do these switches have. The 1900 series, is meant for small offices or kind of edge switches in your networks where you still need that manageability of VLANing, QoS, standard management switching services. And of course, you need to maintain that particular network security and that end switch as well to prevent people from plugging in whatever devices they wish to. And of course, especially the smaller switches, which have the external power supply, their footprint is very small, but they give out a small-ish PoE budget, but enough for a couple of power devices at that location. The web configuration of these devices is made to be very simple, but it needs to be on the device, so no remote management or no cloud management for devices, unfortunately. The 1920 series, these are more capable, more performing switches than the 1900s and can be used as office core switches as well, and is able to move a whole heap of more data than the 1900s. They also have a bigger PoE budget where you need more of the PD devices in the same switch. You can more easily scale the network as bigger, as we provide different types of management options for you. And we also offer more security features, for example, MAC freezing on these switches. So you are able to, once you plug in a device on the switch, you are able to freeze that device's MAC address. And that means if somebody switches another device to that port, it will not get access anywhere, because that switch port is just dedicated for that particular PC or whatever the device may be. More uplink ports, 1 gig ports on the GS series, so gigabit switching, and almost a full layer 2 feature set on these switches. And of course, as mentioned earlier, these can be integrated to our Nebula Cloud solution, where you are able to access and monitor the devices remotely with an easy solution, and the installation itself is made as easy as possible, but we will get into more detail later on the Nebula solution. Then about the new hardware design of the GS1920 version 2 and the 1930s a bit later. So we have introduced a new 8 HP model, which has passive cooling, so no audible noise whatsoever. And the device still has 130 watts of PoE budget, so it's a very capable device and very quiet, and you can easily install it to a desk or somewhere near where people are actually working, and you don't need to worry about the noise it gives out. The front panel LEDs have also been rethought, and it also gives you a cloud indication light. So is the device connected to Nebula Cloud Management or not? It also gives you a PoE indicator, so how much of the PoE budget is being consumed at that device. So is it 20%, 50%, what's the amount of PoE budget that's being used, and also the PoE max indicator. So if you are going over 80% of the PoE budget, it gives you a warning that you don't have much room to play around with. Then something that I'm very fond of is the restore button on the new switches, and that gives you the possibility to set a custom default configuration to that switch. Rather than just resetting the switch to the Zyxel's factory default configuration, you can set your own default configuration. And it is especially handy when you have remote locations far away and something goes wrong, either somebody makes a mistake while configuring the switch, which of course never happens, or something happens and you lose connection to that switch, a local maintenance person can just push the restore button and the switch will be reset to your default custom configuration, which will have the correct type of management IP address, virtual LANs, etc. Just the base configuration that you can just once again access the switch and configure it as you want. These have also improved surge protection, so 2 times stronger ESD protection, electrostatic charge protection, electrostatic discharge, sorry, and so over the air or contact. And 4 times stronger surge protection, so if you have an overvoltage coming through the cabling, either the power cable or the Ethernet cables to that switch. Also, the PoE model's depth has reduced from 33 centimeters to 27 centimeters, and that means that you can install them to smaller racks with perhaps cabling behind them, so they don't take as much space from the rack. Or if you have a full rack, you can even install them back to back to that rack. More fiber uplinks. And one of the really nice things is that we've redone the cooling on these switches. So they have ultra quiet or a whisper quiet cooling, which it automatically adjusts from the temperature of that switch. By base level, depending on the model, it was from 26 dBs to 28-ish dBs, if I remember correctly. So very, very quiet switch. So we have a lot of layer 2 features. VLANing, traffic control, quality of services. We support all of the spanning trees, so basic spanning tree, rapid spanning tree, multiple spanning tree. And we also support link aggregation via an LACP, so you can utilize multiple ports and create one virtual link between the switches and then gain more bandwidth, more reliability if one cabling goes down or something like that. We also support layer 2 multicast. From the security perspective, MAC freezing, guest VLANing, radius authentication from port-based, and of course DHCP server guard, where you can lock the switch so the devices can only access a certain DHCP server and somebody can't push in another DHCP server to that network and then try and hijack things or something like that. Advanced PoE control. So on the bigger models, we offer 375 watts and 130 watts on the 8 HP instead of the 170 watts of the GS1900. Also PoE scheduling and the consumption mode, which we talked about earlier. And also the Nebula Flex support. Then side-by-side comparison with the smaller models. So the main differences were that the 1920 has an internal power supply, unlike the 1900s, which have an external power supply, which of course can be good or bad depending on the installation. So of course the physical unit of 1920 is a bit larger than the 1900s, but then again you don't need that external power supply. You also have combo ports available instead of dedicated ports. You have more PoE budget, and the switch is a more capable, more performing switch than the 1900s. So bigger buffers, bigger MAC tables, and the biggest benefit of it all, you can manage it in Nebula. Same story with the larger switches. So bigger PoE budgets, combo ports rather than just fixed medias. And on the 48 ports port switch, you have a limited PoE port count as 24 ports rather than all 48 ports being a PoE port. There is actually a typo in this slide. The 24 HP does not have 48 ports. It has 26 ports, including the uplink ports. So basically, summary, the 1920s are more capable, more performing switch series in basically all aspects than the 1900s. But of course, for the 1900s, there is a use for them in particular places and in edge switches. Then we go to the 1930s. So the 1930s is once again a more powerful version with 10 gig uplinks, meaning that we have the ability to push through more data. We have the ability to get the 10 gig backbone for the network, which if you are transmitting a lot of data, if you have NAS servers, file servers in your network, that might be a critical speed to have that 10 gig uplink. And we also support ring topology on these, so you can install the switches in a ring topology. So you basically have each switch has two routes to a gateway or a core switch. And if one switch goes down in between, you still have that backup route, even though it's longer than the other one. And we also support layer 3 static routing on these switches. And as for the 1920s, these have a more compact design than the previous models and a high PoE budget. And the nebula management and monitoring and deployment. So we have additional security features. On these switches, we have the 10 gig uplink ports. We have the same type of new LADs as we have in the 1920s. So PoE usage, cloud indicators, and the restore buttons. The revised cooling, so very, very quiet switches. Strong ESD protection, surge protections, and a big PoE budget on top of those 10 gig uplinks. So on software-wise, just a summary. I've named almost all of these in advance, but the layer 3 routing, we do support on these, more specific traffic control, advanced layer 2 multicast, so we support the MVR function, which is a multicast VLAN. On top of the MAC freezing, we support MAC authentication, and we support the 802.1x VLANing and bandwidth assignment from radius, so dynamic VLANings basically. And also the access list with packet filtering. The switch comes with a deployment wizard, which is when you install the switch, you can easily set up the basic features of that switch, meaning virtual LANs, quality of service settings, different types of security settings when you're actually getting going. And of course, you can manage it from the Nebula Cloud management platform. So then we go into a bit more detail on what is this Nebula I have been talking about. Hopefully you all know what it is by now, because we've had it around for a couple of years, but if you don't, let's spend a couple of moments talking about it. So Nebula is our centralized cloud-based management platform for our networking devices, including wireless access points, switching, security devices. We have all sorts of live tools, all sorts of configurations tools through that. It is a very fast and secure way for you to access your networking equipment. It gives you really easy firmware upgrades. As we talked about earlier with Zyxel, they are always free, and Nebula gives you the option to either schedule them or have them fully automated or manually upgrade whenever you want them. And of course, it always tells you when you have a newer firmware available, so saves you a lot of manual maintenance work just by doing that. Of course, the simple deployment of not just switches, but all Nebula devices. And Nebula Flex. So Nebula Flex devices means that you can use the device either in standalone mode or in the Nebula Control Center, or NCC as short. So we also have dedicated Nebula devices which you can only use in Nebula mode, but Nebula Flex devices you can have either standalone or in NCC, and it is as simple as just registering the device to NCC, and it will download all the configuration and the firmware from NCC. And if you want it back to standalone, just remove it from NCC and it will send a factory reset command to the device and go to standalone. So very simple, very basic. So installation by itself, setup without unboxing. So as simply, you can just scan the QR code on the side of the box or the device and add it to a site. Simple as that. Or you can put in the serial number and the MAC address of the device through your browser to the NCC and add it that way. But for example, if you are doing a pre-installation back at the office and you have 10 or hundreds of devices, you can just simply scan all the boxes, add them to a site and add. And when they are online and you have done this pre-configuration through the NCC, they will just simply check if I have internet connection. Yes. Am I connected to NCC? Am I registered to a site? When the question or the answer is yes, I will download all the appropriate configuration, the firmwares, reboot, and start working about of the site. So no configuration on site needed to that device. Just simply plug it in at the location. We also do not need any additional hardware or software, nor on the management side, since NCC is a browser-based setup, so you don't need to install any software to your own PC. We have the mobile application available if you want to manage it via the mobile application or use it as an installation tool, which is very handy for. And we also do not need any cloud keys or any remote PCs or any software hardware installed to the site where the devices actually are. The devices themselves are able to directly integrate to the Nebula Cloud solution. No additional hardware software needed on site, just the internet connection. And since it is a cloud-hosted service, you are able to access it anytime, anywhere. We in the Nordics have a good situation of internet being everywhere, so no more excuses of not having a remote connection to your locations. As mentioned previously, the over-the-air updates, so automated firmware updates. So your devices will always be running a secure firmware with all the most recent features available to them, and you can customize the schedules however you want on location. Also giving you a lot of monitoring information on a summary level, on very detailed client level, port level, and on organization level. So you get a detailed reportings, you will get a a switch and board-based information. For example, how much is the switch consuming PoE budget? What is the status of all ports? What devices are connected to these ports? How much bandwidth are they using? Etc. 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 You can even easily do port power cycles in here. So if you have an IP camera that's not sending, you can just simply power cycle that PoE port and then reset the camera and push on locator LEDs, etc. and see what the neighboring devices of that switch are. Configuration wise, it gives you a virtual stack of all the switches you have set at that site. So for troubleshooting purposes and for configuring purposes, this is a really handy tool, because if, for example, your VLAN something isn't working from port something, you can really easily see in the same plane of glass that which ports are a part of this VLAN, etc. And when you start configuring stuff, it gives you a benefit that you can just select all ports you want to configure. For example, if I want to configure all the uplink ports in 10 switches I have, I just select all the uplink ports and do the configuration once, rather than do a remote session to each and every switch and do the configuration one by one to each and every switch. So saves you a lot of time maintaining the switches as well. As a managing platform, Nebula gives you a multi-tier management platform where you can manage all your customers at one place. For example, I'm an MSP or a multi-service provider, a reseller that provides a service to our or to your customers. They would be organizations. So for example, if I would run a chain of coffee shops, I would be an organization. And under my organization, there would be sites, which would be the actual coffee shops. And you can drill down from the organization level, where you see the very top view, to the from the MSP level to the organization level, where you can see more details in the sites. For example, how much data has been used, how much clients are online, all the devices online, where they are located, etc., etc. Then you are able to drill down to the site level itself and see more detail. And of course, you are able to drill down to each and every device, event logs, you name it, what applications have been used, how much data has been consumed, what clients are connected where. Basically, all the information you would get from the standalone standard devices, but you see it in all the same plane of glass, rather than needing to find out first what the device is and then connecting that. And then it gives you a very, very simple and nice to have view of your network site-based. And as a platform, it is free. So no limitations on what devices or how many, no limitations on how many devices. Of course, not all devices. For example, the 1900 series, it is not able to integrate to Nebula. So Nebula enabled devices, no limitations on how many do you want to use them, no limitations on organizations, site, etc. So it is as a base, it is free. We do have a professional service pack, which includes quite a lot of nice services depending on the installation and the client. Some of these might be a nice to have features or just need features, but that has to be a decision made by each client by themselves. So the professional pack will give you more visualization and alerting. On the free version, you will get 7 days of logging from Nebula. and statistics. And with the professional pack, you will get a year's worth of monitoring and logging data. And also you will get a email and application push notifications. So for example, if a device goes down, you are able to proactively call the customer and ask them, hey, this device is down, is something going on at that site? It is a totally different conversation when you are calling them rather than they have an issue and they are calling you. We all know that. We also get the user audit and change logs, so we can clearly see who has done and what changes. And for example, if those changes haven't really gone according to plan, we are able to roll back to the previous ones easily because we see what has been done. We also provide the automated topology, so a local network diagram. Automated also supporting non-Nebula devices, but of course the information about the non-Nebula devices is more limited than Nebula devices, but it is able to recognize those devices as well. We also provide an automated VPN topology, including throughput information of your VPN tunneling between your locations. Then we offer more advanced IPTV settings. Nebula as basis support IGMP snooping, but if you want to manage that more by setting markup, query aggregation and access switches, and maybe define even port-based multicast settings, lead timers, etc. We provide that with the professional pack, and we also provide a really nice reporting tool for following up what IPTV channels have been used, who has been using them, and how long. And the how long is usually when you are running maybe an IPTV system at a location, let's say a hotel, for example. They are usually measuring the click. So if you are selecting an HBO from the TV menu, it measures how many times an HBO has been selected from the TV menu, but it doesn't really give you the whole truth, since the customer might change channel afterwards, or it doesn't give you the time how long has the channel been viewed. And that is the information we are able to provide when we are looking at the multicast streams, how long they are alive at that particular device. We give you synchronization help. So we are able to create configuration templates. So once again, if I'm running a chain of coffee shops and I have 100 of them, and I suddenly want to change my DPA2 key or something else, you can just do that from the template rather than going through and changing each and every site. A lot less manual labor for you, but you can hopefully still charge the customer for a full price. Installation, cloning. So when you are deploying a new site, you are able to just clone the configuration from the previous site and then make one or two minor changes if you need to, but that speeds up the deployment a lot, since a lot less configuration has to be done that second time. You are also able to create backup and restore points on site level or on a device level, and you can use them either before major changes, or you can use them to create different type of seasonal configurations. For example, if you have a summer season and a spring season in a restaurant, different types of settings there, different types of captive portals, for example, you can just change the whole configuration rather than doing the change each and every time. And what Nebula does with the configuration as standard is that it is stored in the cloud and on the local device. So if something goes wrong and you need to replace a local device, the configuration is stored in the NCC So it always downloads the proper configuration, so you don't need to manually back up that configuration. All right, then that was the presentation I had lined up for today. Thank you all for listening, and it seems that we have a couple of questions, so let's address those now, and if you have more, just please write them in. Do the DAC10 cable work between a VPN 100 fiber port and the GS1920? Yes, it does, but at a speed of 1 gigs. So they are downwards compatible, and they work in standard SFP ports as well, but they work up to 10 gigs. So if you have SFP plus ports in all devices, then you would get the 10 gig speed. Can you tell more about guest VLAN? So it is a easy, secure way to make an isolated guest virtual LAN. Easy as that. I can send you a detailed information after the webinar. So those were the questions I have so far. I will keep the webinar running for a couple of minutes if somebody has some questions. If not, I thank you for attending, and if you have any questions afterwards that you can't think of now, just contact me via my email, jukka@zyxel.fi. So JUKKA, written like that. I will keep the webinar running for a couple of minutes, but if there aren't any questions, I wish you a very happy Monday afternoon, and thank you for attending. it seems that there is no more questions. So if you have any questions later on, just feel free to contact me by an email. And thank you for all attendees. Thank you. Bye.